Hello, everybody. I want you to imagine a little scenario. You're sleeping, you wake up, and you yawn a little. But then you check your phone, and the first thing you see is breaking news! Province passed a new legislative that no longer allows anyone to wear the color blue. It looks a little something like this, the article, I mean. But the worst part is, there's no public consultation, and there is no way to challenge this in court. What's the first thing that's going on in your mind? For me, it's my blue jeans, but also my freedom of expression. How did the Constitution, how did allow this to happen? How did my charter rights just get trampled on without any court ruling? Well, it's thanks to the Constitution. Well, a tool in the Constitution called the Notwithstanding Clause. Now, we'll talk about how this section came to be and what it is, but before that, I would like to make my argument clear. The notwithstanding clause was supposed to be a democratic safety valve, used rarely, transparently, and only after courts made a ruling. But today, the governments are using it aggressively and even preemptively, which shift powers away from judges and towards premiers in a way that the Charter's authors never intended. So, what is this notwithstanding clause? It is Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that lets Parliament and provincial legislators pass laws notwithstanding certain charter rights. Specifically, it can override Section 2, fundamental freedoms of expression, religion, and association, Section 7 to 14, legal rights including liberty, security of the person, and search and seizure, and Section 15, equality rights. So this is how it works. If a court goes through a law and says that these laws violate certain rights in the charter, the government can just say, "We acknowledge the violation, but we're going to proceed regardless with this section." It lasts 5 years and it must be renewed, which is why it's sometimes called the sunset clause. The idea was never that it would be casual. It was meant to be an extraordinary political choice. A moment where the government has to tell the public, yes, we're overriding your charter rights, and we're willing to face the political consequences. But to understand that, we have to go back in history. The year was 1981. Trudeau is Prime Minister, and he has one big goal: bring Canada's Constitution home from Britain. Up until this point, Canada's Constitution was still legally lived in the UK. Any constitutional changes required the United Kingdom's Parliament. Rights protections were scattered, weak, and easy for governments to violate. Trudeau wanted a proper Bill of Rights, strong, permanent, and enforceable by the courts. The Gang of Eight, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and PEI, basically the whole country, opposed him. They feared unelected judges and Ottawa will have too much power. Provincial autonomy will shrink. Courts will strike down provincial laws too easily. Trudeau took this to the Supreme Court. The court ruled legally, Ottawa could patriot alone. Politically, it needed substantial consent of the provinces, which meant that Trudeau actually couldn't act alone and that provinces couldn't stall forever. A deal had to be made, and in came the Kitchen Accord. When justice ministers met behind closed doors, literally in a kitchen, and hammered out a last-minute deal that saved the entire constitutional package from collapse. The price of that deal? The notwithstanding clause. It was a political compromise that got the provinces to sign on. The logic went like this: fine, we'll accept the charter, but we want a last resort escape hatch so legislators aren't powerless against judges. In theory, it was supposed to strike a balance. Trudeau got what he wanted: courts protect rights, and legislators could keep a democratic fallback option. But the fallback was understood as rare and reactive, used after a court strikes something down. It was never imagined to be a routine political weapon or to be used preemptively. But here's the twist: the Constitution doesn't say you can't, and politicians noticed. You see, there are two ways for governments to use the notwithstanding clause. First is the reactive override, which was the intended purpose, where a law is passed, the court checks it over, strikes it down because it violates charter rights, and the government repasses it with Section 33. This was the original vision, where a court gets to review, voters get to react, and politicians have to face the accountability of violating charter rights. But then there's the preemptive use, where the government passes a law and shields it immediately from any charter challenges. There is no court review, no judges weighing in, and no chance for citizens to challenge it. Critics call this charter proofing. Instead of courts checking governments, governments check the courts. And this shift isn't abstract. We're already seeing governments use Section 33 in ways that were never imagined in 1982. Take Ontario in 2020 to 2018. In the middle of Toronto's election campaign, Doug Ford suddenly decides to cut the size of the city council in half. Judges obviously ruled this move as unconstitutional, and almost immediately Ford threatens the notwithstanding clause, signaling he's ready to override charter rights if courts stand in his way. Then there's Quebec, Bill 21, the secularism laws. The government banned teachers and other public workers from wearing religious symbols like hijabs, kippas, turbans, and crosses around their necks. But even more striking is how they did it. They attached the notwithstanding clause right from the start. No trial, no hearing, no judicial review. The same happened with Bill 96, another major law that shielded preemptively before anyone could challenge it. In Ontario, in 2022, the province used Section 33 to impose a contract on education workers and outlaw their strike. Massive public backlash eventually forced them to back off, but the attempt showed how routine the clause has become and how it is becoming a political tool. Each of these examples point to the same trend. Governments aren't waiting for judges to actually strike down their laws anymore. They're reaching for the notwithstanding clause before the courts even get a chance. When governments expect judges to get in their way, when they know the political policies aren't working, when they know courts are going to block them, they don't wait for rulings. They just reach for the notwithstanding clause. Not because it's a safeguard, because now it's become a shortcut. And this shortcut sure is popular. Political scientist Richard Snow examined that every use outside of Quebec's early blanket overrides and found that there's a total of 21 uses, and 18 of those were preemptive, 4 reactive. This means that 82 of all the uses of the clause were preemptive. Of course, why wouldn't they be? Their popularity stems from the fact that politicians, because of them, get to avoid long legal battles, the risk of losing in court, unpredictable charter interpretations, and most importantly, public scrutiny that comes with judicial review. But so what? So what if preemptive use is so high? So what if the use of the clause is so high? Why does it matter that Section 32 is being used preemptively and repeatedly? First of all, it undermines checks and balances. Courts can't step in, people can't challenge laws, and rights don't get tested. Bad and unconstitutional laws can pass without anyone stopping them. The Charter's original intentions were to protect minorities that were being undermined. But those same minorities are undermined because of this clause. Governments can easily push bills that make them look good to the majority without giving, mind my language, a crap about whether they violate the rights of minorities. And this also normalizes shortcuts. Instead of going through the court process, the proper checks, governments just override the rules. Once this happens a few times, who's to say it doesn't keep on going? If this current speed and consistently of the clause's use and its consistent bypassing of the judges continues, then most likely courts will lose power. When governments bypass judges entirely, charter enforcements turn from mandatory to optional. A right you can't defend in court is a right that quietly fades. Rights will start to vary by province. Each government could preemptively override different rights. Your freedom would depend on your postal code. One Canada in name, but a patchwork of protections in practice. Section 33 becomes a political weapon. Instead of a rare, transparent last resort, it becomes a shortcut. Block the courts first, then pass the controversial policy, no judicial review, no public debate, forced by the process. Charter's safety net weakens. Preemptive use removes the moment of scrutiny where rights are tested, defended, and sometimes strengthened. Without those moments, rights could shrink in silence. So let's return back to that headline. No wearing blue for 5 years. No government would actually wake up tomorrow and do that. Not unless there's like a blue phobia going around. But the point was never the absurdity of the situation. It was the architecture of the power underneath it. Section 33 was designed as a democratic pressure valve, a tool used after courts ruled, a full public review, sparingly, and a political cost, not something that could easily be tossed around. Let's go back to that original headline. No wearing blue for the next 5 years. Now, is a government actually going to do something like that tomorrow? Probably not. But the point isn't the absurdity of the situation, it was the power underneath it. Section 33 was meant to be rare, public, last resort pressure valve, something used after court rulings. Preemptive use flipped that. It closes the courtroom before anyone even walks in. It lets premiers speak before judges even can. And it turns rights from guarantees into suggestions. Because the rulings and the decidings of these clauses isn't happening in courtrooms where your rights and freedoms are protected, but in government offices where public popularity is the goal. When that becomes normal, lines between what governments can do and what they should do start to blur. Rights start feeling less permanent. Protections depend on your province, and charter becomes something that government can shield themselves from. So, nobody is going to ban blue. The real question is, the charter is supposed to protect rights by setting limits on the government's powers. If governments start protecting themselves from the charter, what happens to those limits?